Who are badasses in history that school didn't teach you about? William Billy Lee. He was George Washington's attendant slave, and as such, he accompanied Washington just about everywhere. As a result, he not only became an accomplished horseman, due to Washington being a top-level rider himself, but he was also in the midst of the fighting throughout the entire Revolutionary War, likely making him one of the first African Americans to be a part of that cause. In general, non-whites weren't allowed to participate directly until a ways into the war. He was also the only slave of Washington's who was freed immediately when Washington died, and he was given the option of living at Mount Vernon for the rest of his life, which he did. Unfortunately, pretty much everything we know about Billy comes from sources written only by other people who knew him, as he doesn't seem to have left behind any autobiographical data. The saddest part is, despite his valiance as well as being an attendant to someone as iconic as George Washington, him having been enslaved for most of his life is cited as having contributed to the somewhat scarce mention of him in primary sources. I never learned about him in school, and didn't hear about Billy at all, until I was about 29 or 30, in the past year or two, and it's especially disheartening that no writings from his point of view are known to exist. Edit, changed a phrase to be more fitting following another Redditor's suggestion. Joe Medicine Crow was the last Native American to complete all 4 tasks required to become a war chief: touching an enemy without killing him, counting coup, taking an enemy's weapon, leading a successful war party, and stealing an enemy's horse. He did this during WW2. He died about 4 years ago, age 102. Lapu-Lapu. History books often cite Magellan's death with a passing sentence, like died in Southeast Asia, while circumnavigating the world, but Filipinos know he was killed in the Philippines while Lapu-Lapu in the Battle of Mactan. When Magellan landed in the Philippines, he made a deal with a neighboring king, Humabon, that if Magellan took care of a rival chief on the other side of the island, Humabon would swear fealty to the king of Spain. Magellan had no idea he was being used. Magellan initially offered not to attack Lapu-Lapu if he bowed to both Humabon and the king of Spain. Lapu-Lapu refused, and Magellan marched over with his heavily armed and armored men, and was thoroughly thrashed by hundreds of Filipino warriors with swords. Lapu-Lapu is now a national symbol against Western colonization, but I don't think anyone in the US is keen to put him in a textbook. Lapu-Lapu. History books often cite Magellan's death with a passing sentence, like died in Southeast Asia, while circumnavigating the world, but Filipinos know he was killed in the Philippines while Lapu-Lapu in the Battle of Mactan. When Magellan landed in the Philippines, he made a deal with a neighboring king, Humabon, that if Magellan took care of a rival chief on the other side of the island, Humabon would swear fealty to the king of Spain. Magellan had no idea he was being used. Magellan initially offered not to attack Lapu-Lapu if he bowed to both Humabon and the king of Spain. Lapu-Lapu refused, and Magellan marched over with his heavily armed and armored men, and was thoroughly thrashed by hundreds of Filipino warriors with swords. Lapu-Lapu is now a national symbol against Western colonization, but I don't think anyone in the US is keen to put him in a textbook. Matilda Gage. She was a hardcore feminist who also fought for Native American rights, and was an abolitionist. She fought hard to get rights for everyone, and was also really smart in fields like science, and the Matilda effect is named after her, which is the tendency to not give women credit for seems a terrific invention. Yevno was a socialist Russian revolutionary assassin who killed Russian ministers in an attempt to bring about a socialist revolution. He consistently pushed for Russian socialists to be more violent and engage in more extreme measures. Yevno became the leader of the Socialist Russian Combat Organization in 1904. He organized assassinations of the Russian Minister of the Interior in 1904 and the Tsar's uncle in 1905. What really makes him a badass was that he was a double agent at the time, and the Minister of the Interior he ordered dead was technically his boss. He was simultaneously the highest ranked terrorist in Russia and the highest paid police informant. Kapitan Witold Pilecki, a Polish cavalry officer who undertook an insane mission to get himself arrested by the Germans and sent to the Nazi concentration camp at Auschwitz. He escaped too to tell the world of the horrors, but no one really paid him much attention. This is just the gist of it, but the guy had some other amazing achievements. Albert Jack is some kind of Australian superhuman that slashed his way through Dardanelles and made a trawn out of the Ottoman corpses. This fight earned him the Victoria's Cross. In the north of France he got blown up by a grenade, but he got up and began to punch his way out of a trench, got shot 7 times with 1 bullet in the head, but got up again, freed 20 prisoners and pushed back the offensive. He then was transferred to a communication and information gathering unit where he kept his usual modus operandi when he met Germans. Punching after war, he became the mayor of his hometown and died of the only thing he couldn't beat to death: pneumonia. Anadis was a woman living in Athens. She became tired of seeing women dying in childbirth, so she decided to be a doctor. Of course everyone told her no, because she was a woman, so she used mad acting skills to disguise herself as a man and enrolled in medical school. A few years later she finished studying and began working as a doctor for pregnant women. All the other doctors became antsy about this new doctor, who was doing a better job than they were, and accused Anadis of sleeping with her patients. At the court, Anadis stood up on the stadium and dropped her tunic, probably saying something like, "I ain't fucking your wives." The court was of course furious and was going to arrest her when all her previous patients whose lives she saved busted into the courtroom demanding the charges be dropped. The court couldn't really contend with the angry mob and granted a new law so women could learn to become midwives. There's some speculation as to if the story is real or not, but regardless, she's a queen, and I love the image of her just storming to the center of the courtroom, yanking her tunic off and shouting, "Thomas Cochrane." Everybody's heard of John Paul Jones, mostly thanks to his role in the American Revolution, but Cochrane has him beat in pretty much every category. He was born into a Scottish noble family with a long military history. He joined the Royal Navy just in time for the French Revolutionary Wars, and soon enough commanded his own tiny little ship and proceeded to kick ass and take ships like nobody's business. He kept a whole chest of different flags for deception and designed pulley systems to make his ship look fully manned even when it only had a few people on it. He held off a 6,000-man French army with just 80 men, then blew it up after finally evacuating. After hearing of his exploits, Napoleon dubbed him the Sea Wolf, a nickname that would follow him for the rest of his life. He pretty much single-handedly won the Battle of the Basque Roads, and would almost certainly have crushed the French fleet had his superior not messed up. He made a big fuss about corruption and incompetence in the Royal Navy, which predictably didn't do wonders for his careers. He then went into politics, got into Parliament, and ran with the radical reform group of the time. When his friend got in trouble for insulting the house and was about to be arrested, Cochrane threatened to blow up the house if the charges weren't dropped, and had to be talked down by his friend. When recruiters from Chile, which was in the process of fighting for its independence from Spain, asked him to become the first admiral of the Chilean Navy, he not only accepted, but also tried to convince his new friends to bust out Napoleon from St. Helena on the way. When he arrived in Chile, he immediately did what he did best and then some. Completely of his own volition, he decided to take the last Spanish stronghold in southern Chile, a network of 10 forts that was thought by many to be impossible to take without a prolonged siege. Cochrane took all 10 forts in about a day. He once saw the Spanish flagship docked in one of their ports, so he sailed right up to it, boarded it, got shot on the shoulder during the fighting, then sailed both his ship and the Spanish ship out before anyone could do anything about it. He then went on to fight for the Brazilian Empire and the Greek Revolution. For the sake of brevity, this guy just keeps kicking ass over and over again, like it's nobody's business. He then returned to Britain, rejoined the Navy, and got promoted to admiral, though he never again commanded ships personally, as many feared he would lose a whole fleet in some daring attack. He died on Halloween of 1860, having thoroughly earned his moniker of the Sea Wolf. Suck on that, John Paul Jones. Annie Oakley aka Little Miss Shawshot. She was a sharpshooter between 1860 and 1920. Absolute big D asterisk CK energy. She learned to hunt at a young age, to provide for her family. At 15 she won a shooting contest against a guy she later married. They joined the Buffalo Bill show. She could shoot a cigar out of his mouth, and was the most earning artist in the entire show, even more than Buffalo Bill himself. She was all about female self-defense. She wrote a letter to President William McKinley on April 5, 1898, offering the government the services of a company of 50 lady sharpshooters who would provide their own arms and ammunition should the US go to war with Spain. She even offered to teach the army how to shoot. Not a fan of gun use, but this girl is amazing. Annie Oakley aka Little Miss Shawshot. She was a sharpshooter between 1860 and 1920. Absolute big D asterisk CK energy. She learned to hunt at a young age, to provide for her family. At 15 she won a shooting contest against a guy she later married. They joined the Buffalo Bill show. She could shoot a cigar out of his mouth, and was the most earning artist in the entire show, even more than Buffalo Bill himself. She was all about female self-defense. She wrote a letter to President William McKinley on April 5, 1898, offering the government the services of a company of 50 lady sharpshooters who would provide their own arms and ammunition should the US go to war with Spain. She even offered to teach the army how to shoot. Not a fan of gun use, but this girl is amazing.